For the debate, I recognise the member from Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I rise today to speak about the motion before the House, a motion that's connected to the recent unanimous recognition that intimate partner violence is endemic in Ontario, and a motion that directs the Standing Committee on Justice Policy to review and table its report. Speaker, this motion matters because it signals that the work of preventing violence, protecting victims, and strengthening the systems will not end in a binder on a shelf. It ensures that evidence collected over many months from survivors, from experts, and from frontline workers will move from testimony to tangible action. This committee's work was unlike most government studies. It was a large-scale, government-led, cross-sector review of one of the most complex and costly problems in all of our society. It heard from more than 150 people, around 90 expert witnesses, and 60 survivors. And it reviewed national frameworks, ministry programs, and the Renfrew County Inquest, which examined the tragic murders of Natalie Warmerdam, Carol Culleton, and Anastasia Cusick. Its design was deliberate, Speaker. Violence does not fit neatly inside bureaucratic lines. It connects prevention, justice, housing, health, education, and community safety in a single picture. Passing this motion allows the committee to complete its discipline process, to review, adopt, and table the report so ministries, communities, and the public can begin the next phase of work with clarity and with accountability. A great deal has been said about the choice of the word endemic. Calling intimate partner violence endemic is not minimizing it, it's naming it accurately. An epidemic is a spike, a surge, an abnormal deviation from a healthy baseline. But unfortunately, there has never been a time when violence against women and gender-diverse people was abnormal. It's been constant. Endemic means something that is woven into our social, cultural, and institutional fabric, something that persists for generation after generation, unless we confront it structurally. Speaker, that honesty matters. When we call IPV endemic, we commit to long-term solutions, stable funding, cross-ministry coordination, consistent data, and sustained prevention. We move from alarm to accountability. It's easy to issue declarations. Declarations sound bold, but they actually change very little. Endemic framing demands humility and work. If an epidemic needs containment, an endemic needs management. In public health, an endemic condition is addressed through permanent infrastructure, surveillance, vaccination, education, prevention. Violence requires the same approach: continuous effort, measurable progress, and constant vigilance. Endemic framing keeps the urgency alive without fatigue. It makes prevention part of the ordinary rhythm of government. It's important. Speaker, for me, this is actually not an abstract policy discussion. This is personal. I grew up around violence. To give a little background, my grandparents were born in the early 1900s, multi-generational farmers who worked hard and struggled often. Very common story for many. My earliest memory of my grandparents is when they're in their 70s. Quiet, tired, kind people, at least to my perception at the time. But I'm told many stories that said that my grandfather was actually very hard on his children, especially the boys, using physical punishment for unmet expectations. I'm also told that he pretty much ignored his daughters, kind of waiting for them to be married off. My father, his youngest son, when he was about 5 or 6, he contracted scarlet fever. In the 1940s, scarlet fever was something quite serious. He was bedridden for 6 weeks, and he told me the story that he remembers hearing the doctor who'd come to the house, he overheard the conversation where the doctor said, "Bobby will live, but he will never grow up to be a man." Speaker, the day my father was allowed to get out of bed, he went outside and he climbed up on about a 4-foot pump stand, and he jumped off to prove that he was a man. He fell flat in his face. And he went out and he climbed back up again, and he jumped off, and he fell flat in his face again. And he continued doing that, battered and bruised and bloody-nosed, until he landed on his feet. Speaker, from that moment forward, my father measured himself against a very narrow, punishing idea of manhood. That's the toxic masculinity that we've heard so much about. He spent his entire life fighting physically, verbally, and emotionally to prove something that never needed proving. Unfortunately, that fight extended to his wife, my mother, and later to his children. He left behind people with scars, Speaker, myself included. It didn't, unfortunately, stop even there. My mother, the victim of this violence, ended up being a perpetrator herself. And as children, my siblings and I, we shared violence with each other, unfortunately. It spreads. I share this with this House because it illustrates something that the committee heard time and time again. Violence is a learned behavior. It repeats through generations. Unless it is intentionally interrupted through structure, through education, and through empathy. Speaker, I love my father. He was a challenging person. According to the rest of the world, they thought he was an intelligent, funny, a caring man. He worked hard for his family. And all that is true as well. But he was also very violent. Later in life, and we lost him at age 55, but in his last few years, with the help of his second wife, he did come to understand. And unfortunately, he carried the guilt of what he had done to his grave. That is what trauma does, Speaker. And that's why this work matters so very deeply. Speaker, I have to acknowledge my own privilege. I can walk to my car at night without feeling fear. Okay? I can stroll across a parking lot or down a dark street, and while I'm doing it, I'm thinking about what I'm going to make for dinner, not about who might be walking behind me. I don't check over my shoulder. I don't carry my keys in my fingers. I don't text a friend to make sure that they know that I'm getting home safe. I don't have to. And unfortunately, Speaker, my wife can't say the same thing. My transgender daughter definitely cannot say it. She faces, I'll say, many hate crimes every day on the street. Most women, most non-binary people, face this kind of thing. They cannot say that they can walk down a street casually. They live with a quiet vigilance that most men will never experience. They plan their routes. They plan their shoes, their phone batteries, their exits. They measure their freedom in daylight and distance. That constant mental calculation of where to park, who to trust, when to speak, how to dress. Speaker, I have to assume it's exhausting, and I have been told that it's exhausting. Right? That's the invisible labor of survival. Even for those who have never personally faced violence, the lucky ones, the fear of it still shapes daily lives. It influences where people choose to live, what jobs they accept, whether they go out after dark, and whether they tell the truth about who they love. It seeps into decisions about childcare, housing, transportation, even about health care. Speaker, this is not theoretical. This is practical. It's measurable. Surveys show that a majority of women and gender-diverse people change their behavior because of fear. Not even necessarily experience, fear. the fear itself ends up being a form of harm. It shrinks their lives. So when we call intimate partner violence endemic, we're not using a metaphor. We're describing a condition that touches every space, every community, every income bracket. It exists everywhere all the time, embedded in the daily lives, sometimes visible, sometimes not. And Speaker, that's why this motion matters. Because until we build systems that are strong enough to remove that constant background fear, equality will remain something that we promise, not something that we deliver. We live in a world that has conquered diseases, built vaccines, extended life expectancy. Because, Speaker, progress happens when societies decide to do better. This legislature has that responsibility right now. As a cisgendered man, it's my duty, and it's not only my duty, to refrain from violence, but to challenge it. My duty as a legislator is to model respect, to call out harm, and to design systems that make safety the norm. Allyship is not a label, it's a practice, and it is up to all of us. Speaker, the committee heard clear, consistent themes. It heard that violence is not a string of isolated incidents. It's a predictable outcome of structural conditions: poverty, addictions, trauma, housing insecurity, gender inequality. It heard that prevention works, that early intervention, education, and education with boys and men especially, can reduce risk. It heard that our justice and social service systems, despite their dedication, operate at the edge of capacity, within structures that were built for another time. It heard that funding instability exhausts frontline workers and erodes the continuity of care. It heard that data fragmentation hides both progress and risk. And each of those findings is echoed in the motion that's before us today. Passing this motion means turning those lessons into a coherent, practical plan. The report and the testimony point to what I call three plus one, areas of action. The first, absolutely necessary, support for survivors. Too many victims remain trapped by dependence or fear. No one should have to choose between abuse or homelessness. Even in a housing crisis, safety must come first. We must ensure that shelters, transitional housing, and counseling are available and are stable. Supports must be culturally safe, trauma-informed, and person-centered. Indigenous-led where appropriate, 2S LGBTQIA+ specific, language accessible, available to persons with disabilities, and available in remote and rural communities like my own. We have partnerships with friend centers, Indigenous health centers, settlement services, faith communities, and local organizations to allow survivors to choose the care that reflects who they are. Fear is not simply emotional, it's strategic. Abusers create fear to maintain control, and our response must be to remove danger and replace fear with stability, safe housing, financial independence, and reliable counseling. When our Charter of Rights promises security of person, this is what that must mean. The second big thing is accountability and change. Accountability means a justice system that protects without re-traumatizing. Police, Crown attorneys, and courts need the capacity and the training and consistent risk assessment tools. Bail and probation conditions must be enforced, and we must address those who cause harm. Rehabilitation is not leniency, it's prevention. It's necessary. Evidence-based programs for offenders, paired with mental health and addiction treatment, interrupts the cycle of violence. Where appropriate, the completion of such programs could be mandatory for probation, parole, or for family reunification. Victims and offenders alike must see that the consequences are real and that change is possible. Third, education and culture change. Speaker, this is a hard one. This is a really big one. It's the longest, hardest, and most transformative work that we need to do. Raising a new generation who reject violence as normal, who understand that respect is strength, not weakness. We often talk about prevention as though it were kind of something separate from the culture, but they are part and parcel to the same thing. Culture is what teaches us what behaviors are acceptable, which ones are admired, and which ones are condemned. If we want a culture that rejects violence, we have to teach it. Not once, not in a moment of crisis, right? But continually, the same way we teach all other life skills. Speaker, I'm starting to run out of time here, but I know that cultural change is possible. Just one example that I personally lived through. Speaker, when I was a teenager, cigarette smoking was everywhere. Right? You couldn't go to a movie without that cloud of blue smoke that hovered. Right? I remember TV ads and magazine ads that told you smoking will make you thin. It'll make you calm. It'll make you sophisticated. Smoking is cool. Even manly, to go back to that phrase. Right? I remember doctors being interviewed suggesting one brand of cigarettes over another. It's ridiculous to think of that today. It was part and parcel to everyday life. And then at some point, late 70s, I think, right, we came to the conclusion that we needed to do better. We began educating young people through the curriculum, through peer programs, through mass campaigns. We spoke directly to the youth. And Speaker, within a decade, smoking was banned from schools and hospitals, and from airplanes, bars, and workplaces. And that shift didn't happen because people woke up one morning and felt differently. It happened because we changed the environment. We made healthy behavior easy and harmful behavior more inconvenient. We gave people new role models. By 2020, adult smoking rates have dropped from, back in the 70s, about a third of the population down to about an eighth. It's not completely wiped out, but it has been a very successful program of re-education and changing the culture. Speaker, we can transform violence in the same way. Right? If we change that addiction, we can change this as well. Ontario schools already teach about consent and healthy relationships. It's an important start, but we can go further. Let's make sure that lessons about equality and boundaries and empathy are woven through all grades and all subjects. It's not a subject to itself, but part of everything. Let's build in learning about some of the challenges: coercive control, technology-facilitated abuse. We heard the member earlier speaking about all the harm that is coming through the social media things. Right? Let's equip the teachers and the coaches with the training that they need to model these lessons and give students the right language, right, so that they recognize harm before it becomes habitual. It's not just about classrooms. It belongs in sports. It belongs in the workplace. Education and culture change take time, but they do work, and they save lives before the people are in danger. If we approach it with the same persistence that we once applied to that public health issue, we will see the curve bend. Finally, I said 3+1. The +1, Speaker, we have to measure this. We have to get the data. The committee heard every partner: justice, health, education, social system. They all collect data differently. Without shared definitions, we can't track the changes. And Speaker, prevention is not just confined to government. The committee heard about work happening in schools, sports, workplaces, ordinary places where culture is shaped. Coaches described safe sport programs that taught empathy, so very important. And service, and Speaker, every one of those reduces the caseloads, reduces the emergency calls, reduces the broken lives. I've run out of time here, but Speaker, I need to say that passing this motion is not the finish line. Right? It is the start of a disciplined implementation. Once the committee tables its report, the ministries can align their priorities, their policies, establish the metrics, and build a coordinated prevention framework. Communities can see where they fit in. Partners can plan. Speaker, I hope that everyone in this House supports this motion to move this.